Welcome, everyone, to the Prescott College Impact Career Series with a spotlight on environmental sustainability. My name is Pamela Delaney. I'm the Dean of Graduate Admissions here at Prescott College, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Mary Scarpa and Danielle Mendez. And today we will be spotlighting one of our alums and their work in environmental sustainability. A couple of reminders before we get started. This session is being recorded, though only the speakers will show up. So if you're a participant, you won't be seen on the recording. Please do keep your microphone muted. And if you do have questions, your questions are very welcome. Please put them in the chat anytime during the presentation, this session. I have questions that I'll be asking, but I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to ask your questions as well. So I'm going to be introducing you to Richard Pritzlaff, who is the founder and chair of the Biophilia Foundation. Now, the best way to do this is to read his bio, which I absolutely love. So pardon me while I do a reading of the bio, but it gives you a great comprehensive background of Richard. As a native of Phoenix, Arizona, Richard grew up in the then desert open spaces on the slopes of Camelback Mountain. There were lizards to chase, snakes to play with, and snakes to avoid, coyotes, javelinas, and the last mountain lions on Camelback Mountain. It was these early experiences that set Richard on a path to work as a conservation biologist dedicated to enhancing and protecting wildlife and wildlife habitat. In particular, from 1993 to 2002, Richard raised funds and helped to manage many wildlife habitat restoration and conservation projects while working for the Chesapeake Wildlife Heritage. During the mid-1990s, he substantially initiated the Maryland Department of Environment's Water Quality Linked Deposit Loan Program through the demonstration project funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. He was also appointed by the governor to the Maryland Wetlands Restoration Steering Committee. The committee was charged with guiding the state's efforts to restore 60,000 acres of wetlands. In 2002 and in 2003, he was the project manager for the Trust of Public Land. Since 2004, he has been a full-time president of the Biophilia Foundation. Richard earned his Ph.D. from Prescott College, go Prescott, an MS degree in environmental sciences and policy from Johns Hopkins University, and a BS in engineering science from Vanderbilt University. In addition to the Biophilia Foundation, he was the managing partner of Borderland Restoration L3C, responsible for monetizing enhanced ecosystem services provided through the watershed restoration activity. Richards has served on the board of directors of Wildlife Network, and Defenders of Wildlife. He has been the past treasurer of the Hummingbird Monitoring Network Board, served on the board of the University of Maryland's Harry R. Hughes Center for Agroecology, a former board member of the Plowshares Fund, and a past chair of the Board of Trustees of the Institute for Shipboard Education, which operates the Master at Sea program in academic partnership with the University of Virginia. When not on Biophilia Foundation project work, he can be found in Boulder, Colorado, and has been known to wander the slot canyons of the southern Utah. Richard, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to stop share here so that everyone can see you. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to kick us off with a question, and then again, audience, please do feel free to add your questions as well. So Richard, the first question I have for you is the concept of restoration economies, particularly in the development of regenerative economic sector, is pivotal in your work. Can you provide insights into how the Biophilia Foundation is laying the groundwork for this approach?
Biophilia Foundation does it a couple of ways. The most recent example I can give you is our work in Southern Arizona, in Patagonia, Arizona, where we helped create several nonprofits and a for-profit company. The nonprofits worked to acquire grants and work with private landowners to restore wildlife habitat and especially watershed restoration through restoring hydrology on incised streams and that sort of thing to raise the water tables and link the streams back to their stream bed so that those lands became more productive for all kinds of activities. And then what's called an L3C, which is sort of an LLC, but has the ability to take grants and then become a for-profit company, having done that to prove projects or products. We started that to then try to monetize the sustainably using the enhanced ecosystem services from the restoration projects as sustainably as we could. We did have some products, and I think some of them were very promising. Unfortunately, in that instance at Borderlands, much of the staff were already so busy running a successful nonprofit, they felt stretched, and we really didn't get the kind of support from some of the business owners and nonprofit folks that were working with us to scale into for-profit businesses. So unfortunately, that didn't quite work out. It's still possible. It may be at some point that those attempts will be restarted. I can only hope. But in other projects of ours, we really are trying to work with landowners to help them understand the additional values of the enhanced ecosystem services from projects on their lands, from restoring wetlands, restoring hydrology, and stream function, and those sorts of things. So, and then also other beneficiaries besides the landowner, and hope that they appreciate the enhanced ecosystem services, take some ownership and responsibility for their sustainable management long term, and that requires some educations along with the awareness. Then comes some education about how these things interplay, how to manage these essential resources, and in that we hope that local conversations are started amongst a group of people who then become more engaged and more knowledgeable about how to manage more sustainably the ecosystem services they depend upon.
Great, thank you. Now, I had the opportunity to watch a presentation that you did a few years back on when you were presenting on ecosystem services, and so I think that model is what you're replicating now. And I really liked what you had said in that presentation about it's the community, not the markets or the commoditization of nature that is the principle that makes change. And so it sounds like there is still work to be done in that. And I think that really leads us into a great topic of, what do you, when you're looking at professionals or individuals that are wanting to go into this type of work, environmental sustainability work and conservation of private lands, kind of using those models, what recommendations would you give to students of skills to build and opportunities to take on to prepare them for that? Because I think that you're on the cutting edge of what needs to happen. It's like you had told me earlier, it isn't the markets, it's the systems that we are operating within, right? So love to hear some of your insights on what you'd like to see people build skill sets in to be able to continue that type of work.
No, appreciate that. And yeah, it's not like we need a whole new system. I think we have to work within the system we've got. Unless someone's got, an immediate alternative, we don't have other ways of transaction, either, communication transaction or process, or business and business development and those sorts of things, research and development, financing, those kinds of things. So that's kind of the good news, because at least even our traditional, although I would advise finding less traditional disciplines and interdisciplinary programs like we have at Prescott College. That's the key. We can't have stovepiped people that understand, in one column how to do a certain thing. It's cross-disciplinary, and that's what's really, really needed. Just an aside, I've always felt that if we could reform our educational system so that all the different disciplines could be taught with the central theme of ecology, throughout, and you could teach any discipline through with that theme of ecology. I think that would go a long way of helping people become more aware of the complexity in the interconnectedness of all of our systems, and how they all depend on one another for everything to function more sustainably. The problem is always when you get an over-reliance on any one system. For instance, just again, an aside, the failure of neoclassical economics is classic, such that the idea that our economy, that the entropy and the universe, the physical system, is a subset of our economic system is exactly opposite, obviously. But that's how it's taught, and that's how it's viewed by a lot of people, a lot of policymakers and others. And so that's the classic example of 150 years of a mistake that's really caused us a lot of problems. In terms of, well, to answer your question, this is a very large space. I'm a conservation biologist. So for me, environmental sciences, all of them have been very important to try to understand, to be able to know how and which types of projects to implement where. So you can read a landscape and talk to a landowner about some of the things that are needed to make their land more productive, not only for what they're interested in, but also for wildlife and other ecological processes and ecosystem services in general. So beyond environmental sciences, then you need to get into, how do you finance this stuff? How do you practically implement it? What are the legal, tax, and estate planning even that you need to understand? So all those things come into play when you're working with landowners. And talking with a landowner about the land is like going into someone's house and critiquing their furniture. So you really have to be pretty sensitive and knowledgeable about how you conduct that conversation, and try to utilize a language that's complementary and understandable to the landowner that you're working with. So those communication skills are very important, as well as the other technical skills. But again, everything from law, finance, tax, all those kinds of things are valuable. How to conduct and implement real estate transactions. How to utilize existing farm bill conservation programs and bring those sources of funding, and make it easy for the landowner to participate. For instance, one of my things I always kept in mind, and was told to me a long time ago by a guy I used to work with, was, if you can go to a landowner and say, can I ask you a question? Do you like money and do you like wildlife? If the answer to those two questions is yes, then sign here and I'll do everything else. So we need, a third-party providers who are able to provide that kind of service and make it as easy as possible for a landowner to participate, and sort of break down through some of the practical barriers and technical and financial barriers that would otherwise not allow a project to happen. That's really key. Trying to think of anything else. That's
what I like how you, I like how you're, this is, Prescott College, for example, offers an MBA in sustainability leadership. And I think that a lot of people that are interested in conservation, ecology, environmental justice, those areas, might not think business is a fit. But I think what you're outlining is that these are skill sets that are really important to have as we're moving things forward. And I believe when we talked earlier, you were sharing with me how there's a large transition of generational land right now, as individuals are, as families are leaving the land to their next generation who is not interested in managing them. And so there is a great opportunity to convert a lot of this private land into conservation.
Absolutely. Then, of course, again, going back to your question too about all the other opportunities and needs that there are, municipal, state and federal agency sustainability officers, for instance, so that policy and programs align with more sustainable values and practices. That's very important. We're going to have to understand how to redevelop land and urban land and suburban land. And all those things are going to be opportunities for education, to move our policy discussions and our decision-making and our finance to more sustainable practices and policies. Journalism is very important for obvious reasons. I just want to look at my notes. I made some notes. I want to see if I'm missing anything. You know, business and industrial processes, which gets into the engineering sciences. It's very important that obviously we change, how we make products and what we make them with, and what's their life cycle, what's the life cycle analysis, what's going to happen with them. Hopefully everything can be reused, those sorts of things. So it's a huge space. There's all kinds of opportunities and needs.
And before I ask this question, I just want to remind the attendees, please do feel free to raise your hand to ask a question or put something in the chat for Richard. I know he'd be happy to answer for you. Richard, in terms of, kind of along those lines, how does one who is passionate about environmental sustainability start to build community? Because so much of the work that we do isn't just our degree, and it just isn't the day-to-day work that we do, but it's the community we belong to. And what suggestions would you give to students that really want to start to build their community around environmental sustainability?
Yeah, there's very many ways to do that, from identifying a local problem. A recent example I've become involved in is a group called the Friends of Coal Creek. There's a creek that comes through the Front Range here, and some beavers just, it's a very pretty urbanized, suburbanized creek. It's in not great shape. It's been incised, a lot of problems, but somehow, and nobody knows where, some beavers came in and began doing their thing on a old ranch where the folks that own the place have passed on. The current generation that owns the land don't live there, and so it's been left alone. And so the beavers are very happy and doing a great job restoring the stream function, and raising the water table, and the cottonwoods and the willows and everything else are doing great. There's more wildlife and birds, and the other thing that's really interesting about this place is it's connected to a local park. So there's a multi-use path that goes through there. So a lot of people are aware of it and can see what's going on. And so just a guy that used to be a journalist and had been hit that career for at least 15 years, maybe 20 years, saw, wanted to change, saw this opportunity and formed a friends group. And basically has been raising money, putting together the 501c3, and is working with, this is in the town of Lafayette, if anybody knows, outside of Denver, the suburban areas. It's sort of Louisville and Lafayette. And the town of Lafayette's interested in trying to acquire the property. So I've been offering advice and perhaps financing if we can put a deal together to acquire this property. So that's one example. I'll give you an example from Ecuador. These things called water trust funds, which is really interesting, and it's a model that could be that is applicable anywhere in the world. Basically, folks that sort of were the upper watershed of a stream system were screwing it up just through poor management, and so the users of the downstream users were really suffering, and it was making it very difficult for their livelihoods. And a third party came in. They found some local folks who were seen as sort of champions of ideas and causes within the local community. They were trusted, and they started to they were approached by folks from the outside who said, look, we understand the problem. I'm sure you understand the problem. We'd like to help, but we need your help to engage with the local community, because we don't know people, they don't know us. And, without you, nothing will happen. And that's exactly what happened. They started with outside technical and financial resources, a community conversation around the essential resources that they all depended upon, and how to manage the transaction between the downstream beneficiaries and the upstream managers, how to change the management and behavior of the landowners, and pay for the restoration and management of that land more sustainably, that benefited everybody. And they formed a common language about how to talk about these issues that everybody understood. They had ownership of the process, and how the financing and the management and the decision making occurred. And that's been going on for about 20 years now, very successfully in Ecuador. So I encourage folks to take a look at those. They're called water trust funds, and there's several of them, and really fascinating. At first, some folks tried to sort of impose things from the outside, and some indigenous folks said, we don't like that. And this was after about 2 years of work, they rolled this whole program out. And the indigenous folks said, no, that's not really consistent with our values. We don't commoditize nature, which is kind of what the language that these guys were using. And so they went back to the drawing board and said, okay, fine. You guys design it, we'll support you. And that's what happened. It took about another year or two. And they came out with a program that was not dissimilar to what was being proposed originally, but it came from the local community and had a lot more buy-in. And that has been working. So that's the process I've seen work in some instances, and it makes sense to me.
And actually, that just leads right into a question that popped up while you were from the audience while you were speaking. So how do you build trust when you mentioned earlier, you're working with landowners and you're saying, do you like animals and money, right? And of course, or you would say yes. Of course, sadly, in our society, the way our systems are set up is, if it comes to the expense of the animals for the money, that might happen. Or on the flip side, like you were mentioning, how indigenous peoples might perceive that sort of monetization, commoditization of nature. So what do conservationists and people in industries do to build that trust? What are some best practices there?
Sure. First you have to identify what the common issue might be in terms of the management of an essential natural resource for a community. And once that can be recognized by the trusted and influential folks within a community, they can begin to create the space for the community to begin to understand and appreciate the problems, and then put together common language to be able to discuss amongst themselves, not necessarily technical language, but language that they all understand about how to describe the resources and their management, so that they can then begin to propose how to better and more sustainably manage those resources and restore those resources, and how to make that happen both equitably and in a way that the community at large will benefit, not just certain individuals, which can happen. That could be a killer. I think it's called equity capture or something like. There's actually a term for it. I just can't quite recall it. And some of the projects that I looked at when I was doing my research, for instance, there were instances where it's conservation tourism. Some folks were benefiting more than others, and so the community imposed a tax, so that a community fund could be put together, that everyone had a say in how those funds were then spent. And so instead of just a few people benefiting from the tourist dollars, the community was able to build infrastructure, a new school, a community bank for low-cost lending, those kinds of things, from those additional captured funds from tourism. And that worked out very well. People were appreciative of that problem being solved in an equitable way. Otherwise, I think the program would have collapsed, and then help that this had to do with the conservation of an endangered species and the tourism to enjoy that endangered species and how to get that done and capture those funds. So yeah, I think there's, it has to come from the community, but there has to be a way to get the questions asked and the problem recognized in the first place, because a lot of people don't know where the food comes from, or how it's grown, or a better way to grow it. We have commodity and intensive agriculture, which it's done a great job, is very efficient in terms of feeding us. Well, you have to process a lot of the commodity agriculture. Unfortunately, you'd starve to death if you were trying to eat corn and soybean and wheat. And I mean, it's interesting. You go to agricultural areas and they have to go to the supermarket. They're not growing what they can eat on their own land. At least most folks that are doing traditional or conventional agriculture. If you're doing organic and you're doing not the commodity ag, but whatever you might pick and eat yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, that's the exception, right now, that's the exception, not how things are generally. Yeah, which
it is. Thank you for those insights. That's, I think that showing how it really just boils down to listening and having an open mind to what the needs of all the stakeholders are, right? I did get one other question, and I'm going to make this the last question since we're going to run out of time, and I want to respect your time. But it is, what piece of advice would you offer someone looking to grow their career based on the current and future needs that you see within the environmental sustainability space? So what are you seeing out there that's like, this is going to be an unmet need in the future that students can, look to grow in those areas?
Yeah, I think, understanding that all of our systems need to be practiced in a more sustainable manner. Really, any discipline, I think, has the ability to become more multidisciplinary in terms of what people learn and understand, and then how they apply it to a community or societal issues and opportunities. Again, we've spent way too much time in an economic model that doesn't work. And so really, I would say, again, understanding environmental sciences and how nature works, understanding that we have our own needs, but they're not the only needs of living organisms on the planet. In fact, our planet only works because some of the smallest organisms in soils process all the waste. And if we don't take care of our soils, we're dead, in the long run. Same with any species that goes extinct takes 30 other species with it eventually. That's what the science says. So we have to have a broader understanding of our impact and how we satisfy our needs as a community and individually, but how those are impacted, how we do that, and how it impacts all the other fellow travelers on this planet and all the other systems. So again, almost any discipline, but just understanding that you have to look at things from a very holistic and multidisciplinary approach to solve problems. Probably at this point, the most important thing, I think, would be communication and trying to be able to distill the science and communicate effectively across, some of the cultural issues we've got, political issues we've got in this country in particular. So communication skills, journalism, being able to write, and then again, going back to what we were talking about previously, being able to communicate with landowners and decision makers and policymakers about these things in an effective way. I've been working with here in Colorado to have a full-time lobbyist for the first time at the State House, trying to figure out how to do that, working on wildlife issues. And it's incredible to me that, the wildlife are at the bottom of the policy docket on what's discussed, what's understood, and what's taken into consideration on in policy matters. And so we have to change that. So yeah, I mean, our problems are imminent and they're deep, but things have to change pretty rapidly. And I think people need to become very effective communicators.
Yeah, thank you. That's really a wise advice. I mean, ecological literacy, how do we embed that through everything that we do? I mean, from the way you describe it, I can see that a student thinking about making a positive impact on environment and within the field of sustainability can do that, whether they're a supply chain manager or organization, whether they're a K through 12 educator, whether they're a mental health counselor, whether they are, there's just so many, it's a value system and a literacy that we can build in with everything that we do. And that's a really great point.
One other thing I should highlight that I haven't is the need for folks to be able to come in with existing community groups, either nonprofits, for-profit, local organizations, but enhance their capacity to be able to get involved in these kinds of sustainability projects and find funding for them. For instance, the Farm Bill conservation titles have lots of billions of dollars available. The Biden administration's latest infrastructure bill, Build Back America or Build America Better, I can't quite remember the acronym, has lots of money for conservation and for small groups, but a lot of groups don't know how to access those funds. So that's a very, very important and immediate capacity building need that local organizations have.
That's great. That brings it back to that first example that you gave in terms of the nonprofits being overwhelmed as well, right? And being able to extend their work. Richard, I really want to thank you for your time. Just 30 minutes. I've learned so much about the work that you're doing. I can speak on behalf of all of us at Prescott College. We're so thankful for the work that you do and for your time, just sharing your experience and insights with us. And so thank you again. And
it's a pleasure and I've enjoyed the conversation. So thank you too.
And I